When your favourite show is getting a spin-off, it's an inherently difficult balancing act. The formula is inevitably about to be changed with different character dynamics and story style. So what justifies this spin-off existing? With that in mind, both Arrow and The Flash fulfilled a different purpose in their shared universe. Arrow was the dark, gritty, Nolan-inspired street-level story, while The Flash was brighter, more traditionally superhero. So when the side characters of both shows were combined into DC's Legends of Tomorrow, what was the purpose of the show, what niche was it going to fill, and what stories was it going to tell that the others couldn't?
Sometimes the world needs a team. You call this a team?
The first season of Legends tried to tell an epic, fundamentally dark tale, featuring the time-traveling crew of the Wave Rider, formed by Rip Hunter, trying to stop immortal villain Vandal Savage from conquering the world in the future. There were some great moments and episodes in this season, but these mainly came from the moments where the show let itself have a bit of fun.
How many knives do you have?
Their respective flagship shows are both stylistically very different, so why not just make Legends a straight-up time travel comedy? Less Terminator, more Bill and Ted. There's one simple writing formula that Legends uses that I think sums up perfectly why the show works. Blank meets blank. For example, the premise is simply Doctor Who meets superheroes. But take that a step further, and every episode feels like throwing darts at a board full of ideas and seeing what combination you come up with.
Those Confederates look a lot like... Don't say it!
Zombies in the American Civil War, Julius Caesar trying to recruit frat boys into his army, or Vikings worshipping a fluffy children's toy.
Beebo, hungry. And our god hungers for battle.
And one of Doctor Who's biggest appeals is very much alive in Legends, the use of historical guest stars like George Lucas, J.R.R. Tolkien, P.T. Barnum, Helen of Troy, Elvis, and even a young Obama. And one particular thing that makes Season 2 onwards stand out amongst its superheroic peers is the idea that the crew of the Wave Rider are the heroes that didn't make the cut. The Atom and the White Canary don't have in-universe action figures or coffees named after them, like Green Arrow or the Flash. Initially, this seems to have been a tool to explain why Flash and Green Arrow weren't brought along to fight this big threat, in that Rip chose this team because they were disposable to the timeline. If they died fighting Savage, their death would cause the least overall impact in the greater scheme of things. On a meta level, this is a commentary on how, none of these heroes got their own shows. But as the show went on, it seems the writers began to really look at this idea as something that could be better used. What if this was the actual premise of the show? That you had this group of superpowered and extraordinary outcasts and misfits who really shouldn't be on a team together, who definitely shouldn't be responsible for safeguarding time itself, but yet, here they are. Thus, the tagline.
But don't call us heroes. We are legends.
It also makes the Legends easier to root for as characters. It's easy to be a superhero when you can move so fast a nuclear explosion stands still, but the Legends are the underdogs, in way over their heads, and still trying their best regardless. This move makes the actual characters far more integral to the story of the show than previously, making the seasons revolve around their actions and their own consequences, and unfortunately, this means losing Rip for the most part. Not having him about to tell the others about the rules makes it easier for the characters to break them and gives the story greater freedom. Reducing focus on Rip going into Season 2 and instead centering more on the ensemble as a whole has a big benefit, in that the show was able to find better ways to incorporate the whole cast into the greater narrative. They weren't there for the sake of a team-up event anymore, and every member of the crew now served a more obvious purpose. Sarah is now the captain, Nate is the info dump, Mick is the muscle, Ray is the heart, etc, etc. There's a much more perfect balance in the team, and makes them more engaging to follow. Having Sarah in charge compared to Rip just made such a difference. Rip is a great character, portrayed well by Arthur Darvill, but he comes with too many rules, and his presence always threatens to hold the story back. He's the boring dad with the strict bedtime, where Sarah is much more the cool aunt who's probably not the best influence, and almost definitely shouldn't be left in charge of the kids. This dynamic is what makes the crew so much more fun to watch as well. Rip was never going to be able to be that, because he was there due to such a dark reason, the death of his wife and son. Sarah may have baggage, but it's not the primary reason why she's on the Wave Rider, and she's able to let loose a bit more as a result. Going forward into a second season, the writers also changed their approach to their villains. Vandal Savage was written to be this big, singular threat that required all the legends to be stopped. But a single villain is hard to write for in an ensemble show. He can't have a proper dynamic with the whole crew, so what does everyone else do when they're not the focus? And so in Season 2, Legends introduced the Legion of Doom. And it continued leaning into the overall theme of heroes that didn't cut it by doing the same with its villains. The Legion is comprised solely of antagonists from Flash and Arrow, and each of them have a simple, understandable motivation, changing their fates so they don't lose. This is the best kind of hero-villain story, where the villains' wants are simple but still incompatible with the heroes. This is also a great example of Legends fully capitalizing on their shared universe, using already established characters, dynamics, and plots to give birth to something new. For example, Sarah's main storyline in that season is dealing with a death that occurred in Arrow, not on Legends. We don't need to spend that long getting to know the Legion because we know them already from the other shows. And even if Legends is your first step into the world of the Arrowverse, there's still plenty of explanation as to who these characters are, why they're there, and why they matter to this story. It doesn't punish you for not watching the other shows, but it certainly rewards you. And even so, Legends does an impressive amount of character work with these villains that they could have gotten away with not doing. The most noticeable of these is Damien Dark, who actually gets more development overall than he did in his home show, Arrow. In Season 1, Dark has a cameo that basically amounts to nothing more than, hey, it's this guy from that other show. After the soft reboot that opens Season 2, he comes back as a member of the Legion, and then in Season 3 returns with his daughter, Nora, which literally breathes new life into the character. He remains both hilarious
Nora doll, what's the point of living if you can't have a bit of fun?
Well, I'm not enjoying myself. I'm annoyed.
Hi, annoyed. I'm Dad.
and hilariously evil all the way through.
Fine.
But his relationship with Nora humanizes him without redeeming him. It continues the trend that Legends of Tomorrow began after the end of the first season. Bring in a character because they have a story worth telling for them, not just because they have access to them. It'd be easy to let every side character from the Arrowverse show up and join the team for a bit, but it's better that the show doesn't do that. It lets Legends become its own thing, rather than simply being the spin-off show that characters are shipped off to when the original runs out of ideas to do with them. Season 1 wanted to be the Avengers, but using War Machine and Bucky Barnes instead of Iron Man or Captain America. Season 2 onwards has been Legends realizing that it is much more straight up Guardians of the Galaxy or Thor Ragnarok, just to really overdo that analogy. Simply put, the team behind the show looked at what worked, what didn't, and came to the conclusion that seems obvious, but hasn't always been so easy to land on. Comic books can be really silly. Before anyone gets offended by that blanket statement, some of the best comic stories and adaptations ever are mature, realistic takes on these characters, but that's not going to work for every character, because Legends is at its best when it's being fun. Not everything has to be epic or drama driven, and some days I just want to hang out with the Legends. And beyond all that, it's the pure creativity and imagination that sets Legends apart. A unicorn at Woodstock is one of my favourite visual gags on television, and it proves that no idea is too weird or too crazy.
Oh my god!
Basically, if you're looking for something a bit different to the usual superhero story, something a bit more fun with no illusions about what kind of a show it is, Legends of Tomorrow is the place to look.
I gotta say, Miss Lance, now that I've seen your team in action with my own eyes, you are even worse than I imagined.
Thanks for watching, and if you haven't already, I hope this convinced you to give Legends a try. And going forwards, what insane time period and genre mashups do you want to see the Legends take on in the future? And while you're still here, like, subscribe, and possibly check out my new Patreon page, linked down in the description. Even if it's just a simple like, any support is always appreciated.